What I'm going to do here now is to modify the application to automatically add a couple of customers to the database whenever it's created or recreated. I'll use the same drop create database if model changes object that I used to automatically recreate the database when the model changes, but this time I'll create an object derived from that class in order to seed the database with data. So the code to create the data will be within an override of the seed method. Okay, so I'm going to put this within the ordering model. It just needs to be available within the application. I'll put it at the end here. And it's a public class. And I'm going to name it Ordering Initializer. So I'm following that convention of ordering model, ordering context, and so forth. And then I need to derive it from the drop create database if model changes. And I also need to specify the ordering context. Okay, so it's inheriting from that object. So essentially what's happening is by using the drop create database if model changes right there, I'm giving it behavior, but now within this class I can modify that behavior. Okay, so there's my class definition. So now what I need to do is override the seed method. So I'm going to create a protected, and it's an override, so I need to specify that. It's not going to return anything, so void, and called seed. And as you can see, I have the seed in the list. Okay. Now in this case, I don't need the base method. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a list of customers. So a generic list object, and it's of type customer. And I'll call that customers, and new up that object. Oops, not creating a method. Okay, so here is where I'm now going to new up individual customers, and they'll be added to that collection. So new customer, and I'm going to set the first name to Don. So I'm going to essentially restore the data that I had earlier put in the database, more or less. Set the last name to Kylie. Company. So these are just the different properties of that customer class. I'll use my real email address. And if you want more information from AppDev, you can call this number. Check though, they may change it sometime in the future. And set the created date to right now. Okay, so that's my first customer. I'm going to add one more. And set all of the same fields. So I was Carol, my sweetie. And she works for a company called Northern Alaska Tour Company. She's a guide doing tours to the Arctic Circle and to Coldfoot and Dead Horse up in Prudhoe Bay here in Alaska. And not her real email address. Not sure how she'd feel publicizing her real email address. That's not their domain either. Phone. Not their real phone, but you can look it up online. And created also date time right now. Okay, So that's essentially a shortcut single statement way of creating a list with a couple of customer objects within it. All right, last thing I need to do is loop through each of these and use a lambda expression, C going into context.customers.add. Oops. Okay, so this might look a little strange if you're not used to some of this syntax. A little bit different in Visual Basic, but same basic idea. What I'm essentially doing is I'm looping through each of the objects in that customer's collection. Again, that's that collection that I created right there. Looping through it and executing this statement for each of those customers that it finds within that collection. So it's going to execute this context customers.add, and it's using the current customer, first me, then Carol, as it loops through each of those. So a pretty nice terse kind of notation. Once you're used to it, it's really pretty elegant. Okay, so that's my ordering initializer. So I have it created, but I haven't done anything yet to actually implement it, to tell code first, use this thing. So now what I need to do is I need to come back over to my global.asax file, where I originally set it up to just use drop create database if model changes. So I no longer want to do that because I want to use my new ordering initializer class. So I'm going to comment that out. So we still have it. And do the same basic thing in terms of calling the set initializer. But this time, I'm going to specify ordering.models.ordering_context. So that's specifying the context object. And now, instead of newing up a drop create database if model changes object, I'm going to new up my ordering initializer. So I need a new ordering.models.ordering initializer. Come out, and there we go. So now, looking at this statement, it's not obvious what strategy I'm using because I defined the strategy here within this ordering initializer back over here because I derived it from this drop create database if model changes. And that's what enabled me to use the C. So now when I run the application, it's going to use this new strategy that I've defined. It's still going to drop and create the database if the model changes, but it's also going to seed the database. If it recreates it, creates it or recreates it, it's going to seed the database with data. Okay, so let's go ahead and run the application. Again, fingers crossed that I did everything right. Okay, and there's the application. Wait a second, where's my data? Well, if you looked at previous videos, you'll know that when I changed the model the last time, I ran the application. That changed the model. It dropped and recreated the database. I didn't have any seed data at that point, and so it didn't put anything into the database. With the changes I just made, I didn't do anything to change the model. So it saw that the model still corresponded to the last date of the database. So it didn't need to drop the database, didn't need to recreate it, and so the seed method didn't run. Okay, so let's rectify that. Let's get this thing to actually run. So I'm going to come back over here to my ordering model, and I'm going to do something to trigger a database recreation. So I'm going to come up here to my order model, and I'm going to add a product count. So I'm going to put that right after total order. So it's going to be a public integer, and I'll call it product count, and put in my getter and setter. Okay, so now I have done something to change the model. So I'll run the application again. Take a little bit longer to start up, not too much longer, because it has to drop the database, recreate it, and then it seeds the database. So assuming, once again, that I did everything right, there it is. We now have a changed database schema. So we can go over here to Management Studio, go into Ordering Model, and into Orders, in the columns, and see that we now have a product count. So I've made a change to the database, and it's seeded the database with the data that I defined within the seed method. And now I have some test data. Anytime I drop the database, I always have data to work with. So as I develop the details page, the edit page, the delete page, and so forth, and make changes to the model, I always have test data, at least until I delete both rows.